So thank you so much, Sue, for coming and doing this show that I'm so insanely happy with, and everyone really seems to embrace. And I know that she's an incredibly generous speaker and artist, so I'm excited for all of you to get to be here tonight. And I want to thank Ava, who works for us, and this is her last day of the season. So thank you, Ava, for all your help.
Thank you, Ava.
And no further ado, Sue, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'm Sue. Jess, that was a wonderful introduction. I was telling Jess, of all the people I've worked with throughout my career, she's the one person that I really feel like listened to me and wrote really eloquently about the way I babble my way through things. I don't consider myself to be like overly intellectual about the work I make. However, it's really intellectually important to me. So therefore, when I come across somebody that's able to interpret the way that I'm speaking to them, it's really gratifying because it's not my best way of explaining who I am on writing, more so. So being in here right now is a really great example of what I've been doing for about the past 10 years. So early in my career, I started painting. You know, I've been making things my whole life, but then I started painting like sort of the plein-air style, you know, standing outside with all my stuff and doing this and all this kind of business. And I grew into, I wanted to make bigger and bigger and bigger things. And so for years, I spent years traveling around the United States. I've been nearly everywhere for pretty extensive periods of time, and I lived outdoors, and I went to really remote areas, and I've done it over the years once a year. So I built this vocabulary in my mind, you know, all the things I've been absorbing for years and years. But what I did was I sort of transitioned from teaching. I've considered until now to be a time where I've been training myself more or less. So I did the plein air, the outdoor landscape painting, and I kind of got my own language there and my own ability to capture what I was thinking about and what I was doing. And then I moved into, like I said, wanting to make bigger and bigger pieces. So I would have a 4-foot canvas in the top of the car and sleep under it and drive around and try and make canvases. And then my husband and I eventually bought this piece of land out in very rural Utah, and we have a yurt, and it's way out, and that was a time when he and I could have a home base and be somewhere. So I started to have like 4.5-foot paintings out in the fields with 2x4s and things, and so I would work on those for a while, and then I would bring them in and keep moving forward on that. And then from there, I always had this idea as a young person in my early 20s. My plan was to get in a car, drive around the US, and do a painting in every state. And I had never been anywhere, so when I left, my mind was blown. I had no idea how to take that information and turn it into the series of paintings that was in my head because I was so overwhelmed by what I was seeing and learning about. So I had to do that for 20 years. And then I started making the painting of the states. So I've done about 40 at this point. And what I did for all those years is I went to all these crazy places. I photographed everything like this. I'm not a photographer. They're just like kind of crappy point-and-shoot pictures. And I would come home and print them and tape them up and have that there. And then I could make the whole painting based on the photographs, so that the first 40-ish paintings are, in theory, a place you can stand and see something that actually exists. And of course, it's through, you know, my own vision and the hyperbole and all the different things that I pull in as an art maker. But it would be like, that's the shape of the rock, this is the tree, this is the place where you can stand and look out and see this thing. So over the years, I was doing some historic locations, places that were just personally my favorites. And I kind of burned through the first 30 states pretty quickly, and I felt like it was really growing. And then once I got to about 40, I started to change. My work really started to change. Like, I was finding myself less interested. I didn't want to use the photographs anymore. I had all this information up here, and I needed to like take it and build something on its own. And so I put that project down for a while. So it's probably been 4 or 5 years since I tried to go back on the last 10, and that's how I moved into this area. And so for me, this group of paintings is a really great example of all the visual information that is mine and all the language that I use, the forms, the different things that I'm reusing all the time in this representational context, but I'm pulling it out and making it in my own context. I don't, not representational. So it was representational, but I'm pulling myself into a place where, because it's not specific, I have this freedom to invent and do whatever I want in order to kind of manipulate the process and the physicality of the painting. Like, I get right in there now. Whereas before, when you have photographs, you have to draw that line and draw this line and do this thing and make it look like that and do that. And so I would mostly do that and then kind of overlay some other things. But now, as an example, I'll give you a couple examples. This painting was upside down for about 1.5 years. It started out as a giant boulder on the ocean. And this is the boulder part, these white sections. And so over time, as I'm solving in such a different way. It's about finding my way through the painting and letting the materials kind of control me instead of me controlling my materials, which is what I did for many years. I was trying to learn how to be a painter, trying to learn how to move paint, trying to learn how to make a painting that had this feeling in the end that felt like something that was unique to me, but still using my own language of landscape. So now, they take so much longer to make because they get flipped and moved and poured over, and then you have to remove something and add something back in. And so I picked the paintings for this show because of a few things. One, this is one of the very first paintings that I did using this free association and non-specific location. It's also a time when I started to choose new materials. For 30 years, I've been using oil. And honestly, I started to get a little bored. And that's what happens to me. I get to a certain point with something, and if I kind of get it under control, and I'm making things, and then the next thing kind of starts to look like the last thing, it just bores me to death, and I have to knock it down to 0 and start doing the total opposite. So in addition to all of these, I have these little paintings like this that are about 12 inches square. I've been making those throughout this period. But here, I started with the acrylic. I thought, okay, I'm going to make an acrylic painting. And I never liked acrylic because the only acrylic paint that I ever had access to or I ever really knew about was just this like kind of stringy, gross, shiny paint that I never really enjoyed the end result a lot of times when I would see surfaces. But then finally someone turned me onto this Guerra paint. It's called, it's a brand that I really like, and it has the binder and the pigments separately. So you can mix anything you want. It can be thin, opaque. I can make it matte finish, shiny. I have control over everything in the end. And so I really attached myself to the matte finish because I don't like a lot of shine. And so I started the acrylic painting. I got to a certain point and I couldn't handle it. It didn't have like this oomph. I needed this thing to feel like something, and the oil ended up being the only way that I felt like I could solve it. So at the same time, so then I kind of backed off from it and I went back and I did this painting, which is a completely oil painted painting. It's all oil paint, and it was one that I used the same thing. It's all the made up, it's a completely made up information. The tree is a form I've used a lot. I use the stumps a lot. And with oil, I kind of went back into it, but I did a lot of something that I hadn't done before, which is all those purple areas. That was one unified space for a long time, and it had all this activity going on. but it was not letting the tree be forward. So then when I pulled the yellow in, it kind of created all of this space in that sort of shortened composition. You know, it's not a really deep space like, say, this painting right here. And so then I finally started to get a handle on the acrylic. And so I started this painting. I had a show in the North Dakota Museum of Art, and it's a huge, beautiful museum. It's 2 sides, and I went out. I stayed at their residency for a few weeks, and then I saw the museum, and I was like, oh my God, this space is amazing. Like, make paintings for the space. So that's what I did, is I had 2 paintings this size, a couple others like this, but I had all this freedom. I was working, and then COVID came in, and it was like the best thing for me artistically. It was terrible for every other reason in the world. I don't want to belittle that situation. However, I really started to dig in deep with these things and just paint them and paint them and paint them. And this size, I can't flip. It's too huge. It's stapled to the wall. And I just really pushed myself beyond the concept of representation into trying to make something that still feels like a landscape. It still has all these forms that I love. It's kind of abstracted, but I'm not making abstract paintings. I want to be very clear about that. That's not my goal at all. And so the time that I started to do this, then I went back over here. And this has, you know, in theory, you could say there's abstracted elements, but it ends up being much more in the representational camp. This is my favorite part. This is a really accidental moment where I was thinking about the foreground for a long time, and that effect where it kind of feels like a curtain was really accidental, but it made this painting be what it is in many ways, I think. So at the same time that I was moving from this and some other things, I started working on the paper pieces, which are also acrylic, except the purple one has some charcoal. It's just, I got this great paper and ordered it, and it is really easy to manhandle. You can work it. I can like be all my messy kind of physical self on there and not worry about destroying it. It just, each layer sort of adds to the next layer and adds to the next layer because things stay and you can see them as you're building it. And that's always been something that in my work I really love and I think is important. Because they go through so many phases, it's sometimes you can see the three-dimensional impression of the old painting as I'm like making it come out. And I love that. Like if in the end, when I look at 5 or 6 paintings all together and I can see, oh yeah, I remember when you had that weird tree in it and thank God you took that out, or oh my God, I really blew it on that one. I should have kept that thing in. But it's just like the pattern, the history, the whole process of being a physically working my way through every painting. And so, you know, I'm 5 feet tall, I'm pretty short, and I got some ladders and I do the things, but I've gotten really good at flipping. I can take that down, flip it, do what I have to do with it. And even if I do that sometimes, I'll like I have this one painting I've been beating to death. It's the one that you used all the videos of. I know, it's still not finished. It's like 5 years I've been painting that stupid thing. And now I have a new idea and I think it's going to solve it, and who knows, it might not. But so it's just like, it's such an exciting place to be right now because everything I'm making is hard. Nothing has a like defined beginning and end the way when you're like making a place of that scene. It's not like that anymore. I've really pushed myself into being, it's more about the process of painting, how I'm physically making the painting, how you react to something, how you get it to a point and it's really good, and then you take out all this stuff and then you're like, oh, I blew it, I gotta start, I gotta build it back up. Like, there's so much in that that's so different than representing something, just like making something that I use my photographs, I start here and I end here. And so I think what it's doing is it's pushing me to use more abstracted forms, but also keep it within the context of my language, which is the self-portrait. And so Jess wanted to use the collages back there, and I'm really psyched we did, because part of another thing I do in my studio is I have a bunch of different stations. So I have the section that's about this big with all the big paintings. Then I have these tables where I do those drawings on. And then I go upstairs and I have the place where I make all my little drawings with figures and things, and then my table that I just keep, it's like this tall, and I have a pile of old drawings, everything, like just the stuff I've been saving for 35 years. Every crappy thing I ever made is kept in a pile, and I rip things up and use pieces, and I've cut things off, and there are all these little slivers and things laying around, so I just have this pile of stuff. And when I can't, like if I'm working on that and I'm stuck, I just put it away for a while, leave, I might put it in the racks, and then I go work on another station. And the collage station is one I've been doing since I was pretty young, and I just love it. It's sort of a mindless way of putting things together and figuring it out, and this is not going to turn into that. It's more that this that I'm making here, what I'm seeing, when I'm able to put things together like that, it's sort of how what I'm seeing here and trying to figure out how I take this thing that I've used in a painting of Montana and combine it with another form from something from New England or something to that effect, like how I'm taking all my visual memory and all my objects that are in my head and putting them together to create these paintings that have no specificity to them. And the collage, I think, it's just one part of keeping your brain going and your thinking process going, and not trying to control all the things, for all the years trying to control and be like, I want to make a painting that looks like X. I want to make a painting that's like that. And then I have to train myself to do the thing to make the painting like that. And now the paint is 100% in charge, and I'm the reactor to the paint, if that makes any sense. Is there something I'm not thinking about, or?
At one point, you and I were talking, and I'm scared to share the conversation that we were having, and it might have been a quote from another artist who was saying that if there's something in the painting that
That was from, okay, so when I was in graduate school, I had this one teacher who was really astute, smart thinker, and I used to make a painting, and I would be like, this spot, this is the best part of the painting, and I would avoid it and paint all around it the whole time. And he said this thing to me one day. He's just like, sometimes if you're isolating something and you think it's amazing, he's like, it's probably the thing that's holding you back. And I actually use that technique very specifically to this day. Like when I get to that point where there's this like little lovely thing that I think is amazing, I just take it right out because it's not allowing me to find my way through the other parts of the painting, is sort of what I've discovered over years of using that technique. That's one thing that I really did. That was the...
like little key things like that you learn that you know about
Mm-hmm.
that I think anyone in any art form can really gain from, because you manage to free yourself from this control trap.
Totally. And the other really important thing is that I try and tell younger people this a lot. I am not a brain surgeon. I'm not that important. No one's going to die. You can't like think it's so important when you're doing it. You have to have the freedom to allow it to be terrible, to work beyond it, to put it away, to rip it up, whatever. Because if you think everything you make has value, you're toast. That's just how I think. It's not a smart way to think about one's work. Like not everything every amazing artist has made has been of incredible value.
Do you sweat the process of titling?
Yeah, I have pretty dull titles. Like every now and then there's a good funny one, but it's way after the making. I don't even think about it ahead of time.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. That's all I'm thinking, unless I can, yes?
I noticed none of the paintings are signed. Is there a reason?
Oh, no, they are.
They are.
Yes, so I sign them on the back, but I scratch my name in because I really hate big signatures on paintings because I find that it distracts me from the image, and I don't like that.
Okay.
Yes? Jen Dalton said that to me. She did a studio visit with me one day, and we had this whole conversation. She looked at me and she said, "It seems like you're kind of mining the middle here. Like I'm in the middle of representation and abstraction, and I'm mining it all, trying to like find my way in between these two things." That's what that means. And then Jess took it and used it in terms of like topography and land concepts, the concept of mining, which I thought was really wonderful.
Yeah, it was nice. It was a nice metaphor that made itself available.
Yeah, totally.
Because there are a lot of, there's like a lot of writing about Sue's work and ideas about the topography of the U.S. And there's a lot of like pudding stone and all these like
Yeah, pudding stone, yes.
landscape aspects that you.
Yeah, geologic. Yes, I love cracks, I love rocks, I love stumps, I like dying things, all these things. And that's part of like my love of nature and experience and feeling nature and how you represent that. Like how do you represent a storm? How do you represent cold? How do you represent all these things? And so it's the middle. When Jen said that, I wrote it down immediately because it just felt like it was a really great interpretation of how I'm trying to express where I am sort of as a painter and as a landscape painter, because I paint landscape. Landscape is my substructure, it's my thing. And so it's a way of using that term, way of thinking about those terms without being overly specific, I guess.
Do you consider any of the paintings complete or finished?
Yeah, more or less.
Wouldn't go back to any of them?
Believe me, I would paint on every one of these in here, but I don't, because I get to a point, like this is a very completed painting for me, this one back here. I worked on it a lot. I think, they don't leave unless I have that feeling. It would not be here if I thought, if I looked at it and had a little, it wouldn't be here.
Because I understood you to say the process is what is most important to you now.
Yes, so like as an example, this painting, I put it on the ground, I had a bunch of purple, I rolled it out, and then I made a couple of random marks, put it on the wall, and that's where I started. I started working off the random. And so working off the random, but then I eventually pull in the forms that I'm always using. But that is the start of things.
So when you're faced with a blank canvas, is it a really random start, or do you have in your head what you're going to
Totally random.
Totally random.
Yeah, which is completely different than the old way where I had the thing that I was going to make. And I'm not making the thing anymore, I'm just starting.
So is the colour the most important element, or is it random?
Yeah, it's random. Honestly, I use whatever I have the most of. I'm like, all right, I got a ton of yellow, just start going like that. And that's sort of how I pull myself into something. And I would say the elements that are most important to me overall, it's form, balance, color, and space. Those are my things.
Stage do you begin making the form?
It can happen fairly quickly, or it can take forever. It's sort of, like I said, this was an upside-down rock on the beach for like 2 years. And then I finally pulled it upside down, and it became the sky, and I was able to kind of reinterpret what I was looking at by flipping it and throwing myself off. And then you have to look into it and figure out what it is. And that's sort of how I get there. Yes?
So when you said you had a bit that you particularly liked, now you take that out.
Correct.
Right. So supposing, like that one over there, I mean, I particularly like the red rock. If you particularly like that, you take that out. What would you substitute?
It really depends on what it looks like once I take it out. It's all...
Paint over it.
Yeah, I have like some giant boards and things I just like cover, or I'll just paint over it or whatever. I'll just eliminate it somehow. And then, like, if I were to eliminate this in one fell swoop and then it would move into here, I'd just have to draw back into it and solve that area without, I don't know. It's just the way that if once I force the change, it forces me to change, I think would be the best way to describe it. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I also rearrange my furniture in my house a lot, and it always goes right back to the same space. Sorry.
You mentioned you do some figurative drawing.
I do.
Could you talk about that a little bit and the relationship you have with the figure and these more in the middle
Sure.
abstractions? And then the other question I have for you is what in your thinking does the stump, is there sort of a symbolic reference to the tree stump?
No, the stump is not symbolic, although when Doug and I first bought our land in Utah, it has these dirt roads that the miners created way back in the day, and what they would do is two big thank you, Doug. Bulldozers with a huge chain, and they just drive and rip all the trees out of the ground, stumps and all. Like, they just get ripped out, and then they throw them in these huge piles. So we have those everywhere. But when the miners were camping, they would cut off the tops and leave the stumps behind for firewood. So when we first got there, we had all these cool, super old, like, cedar stumps, and I flipped them upside down. So they're like little sculptures in our land, kind of. And I just like a good stump. And then the other thing you mentioned is that I do figure drawings. I mostly they're self-portraits, and I started doing them a lot when we were traveling because they're small. And so especially in our year at night, I would set up, and I could just do these very quick drawings using a mirror. They don't really look like me that often. They sometimes do, but I think a lot of it as being like this thing I did when you're young, where you learn how to paint, learn how to do a figure drawing where you keep your arms straight and you do things like that. And so I made hundreds of those, and I have a bunch of these 11 by 15s of my head, and they have a lot of humor. They feel like a lot of drawing to me. They're really just about the sort of automatic motion that I can do. And then I'm still experimenting with making ones that are larger and have more figures and things, and that's the sort of ongoing world. But that's that. It's really great. Anybody? Oh.
You work at a little bit of a surreal quality to it, or otherworldly. Is that intentional? I don't know if it's the colors you're using, but I don't know. Is that intentional?
I don't really think that way. I just am a lover of color, and it happens to do its thing but I don't think that way. And I think that's what I mean when I say I'm not like overly intellectual about my work. Of course, I think about it all the time, and I have intellectual ideas about it, but I don't come in and say, well, I read this thing and I did this thing, or I'm interested in this concept and I'm going to make a series of paintings about this thing. I don't really work like that. So, thank you. That's great. All right, thank you. It's so nice to see so many people here. It's really great. This is pretty great. Yeah, thank you very much on this lovely summer day.